Thanks very much for your patience. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of the management and staff of Sterling Asset Management, we extend a warm welcome to you and our special guests to our first investor briefing for the year. We also extend a very warm welcome to the Nationwide Radio and their listeners, as this event is being covered live on their Nationwide at 5 program. Jamaica is on the path to economic independence, and there's a need for the country to put its economic affairs in order so that there will be no need to return to the IMF when the current standby agreement ends in 2019. Growth is a fundamental ingredient to achieving this independence, and it is for this reason that the theme of this evening's event is the way forward to achieving growth. In this regard, we are honored to have our special invited guest, the Honorable Dr. Nigel Clarke, Minister of Finance and the Public Sector, to share with us his thoughts on this subject. This year's staging of our investor briefing will take a slightly different format. We have abandoned the traditional podium-style address and will be using the format of a fireside chat. A fireside chat is a public conversation between two or more personalities in a cozy living room style atmosphere. It is essentially a casual but interactive conversation about a topic of interest. Tonight's conversation will feature our President and CEO, Mr. Charles Ross, asking the Minister a series of questions on his policies for bringing growth to the local economy. We are all very excited to be part of this conversation and look forward to an entertaining and lively discourse. After completion of the conversation, you will have the opportunity to ask a few relevant questions to the Minister. Notice the word relevant. My name is Ian Watson. I'm the Vice President for Sales and Marketing at Sterling Asset Management and will be your Master of Ceremony for this evening's program. I now invite the Minister and Mr. Ross to take their seats on the stage. I also call on our VP Investments and Client Services.
Smart as I was, doing some research on our guest and realized that I could be standing here in front of you all night speaking about his accomplishments. So as to allow him to have time to do what he came here to do, my task is just to say enough. Dr. the Honorable Nigel Clarke is a Rhodes Scholar. And there's no question, that's class. He graduated from the University of the West Indies with first-class honors in mathematics and computer science. He holds a PhD in mathematics from the coveted University of Oxford, so we know he's bright. Some of us have had the good fortune of following Dr. Clarke throughout his eminent career. He has served in various eras in the public sector, most of them at the level of chairman or director. He was chairman of the National Housing Trust, the Port Authority, the Heart Trust, and was a director of the Bank of Jamaica. He served as Ambassador of Economic Affairs, representing Jamaica's interests in negotiations with multilateral institutions. He was a senator in the upper house of the Jamaican Parliament between 2013 and 2015. He is currently the Member of Parliament for St. Andrew, Northwestern. His career also took him into the private sector. He spent over 15 outstanding years with the Musson Group as vice chairman, helping to expand the group in over 30 countries around the world. He has been honored by the PSOJ, receiving its 50 Under 50 Business Leader Award in 2012. He also received the Kiwanis Community Service Award in 2012. Dr. Clarke is an active social entrepreneur. He has been founding chairman of the National Youth Orchestra of Jamaica, an NGO that operates music for social change programs at 8 centers in Kingston and Spanish Town. His latest accomplishment was being entrusted with the awesome, and some would say the unenviable, responsibility of Minister of Finance and the Public Service. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome our special guest, Dr. the Honorable Nigel Clarke.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, at this point, we'll now hand over to Charles to start the evening's proceedings.
Okay, thank you very much, Ian. Thank you, Pam, for that introduction. Let me start by extending a warm welcome to our distinguished guests, clients, and of course, the listeners on Nationwide this evening. It's a special privilege that we have hosting Dr. the Honorable Nigel Clarke, our newly minted Minister of Finance and the Public Sector. Welcome, Minister, and thank you very much for joining us this evening. What we hope to do is talk a little bit about some of the issues that affect the island's economy at the moment. I think Ian mentioned in the introduction, economic growth is one of our holy grails. But before we do that, I'd like to start just by asking you to tell us, why you left the private sector and the lofty heights, as Pam mentioned, to go into the public sector, which we know is quite challenging, and your portfolio in particular. So could you tell us a little bit about that?
When you invited him to a fireside chat, I was wondering where the fire was. Now I realize the fire is you. Charles, I have always considered public service as the highest possible calling and a noble ideal. Having said that, I did not set out to enter, certainly not to enter representational politics. I, in fact, tried hard to stay away from it for a long time. I would have had many opportunities over the past 20 years to get involved in representational politics, but I took a decidedly private sector career. But even while doing that, I engaged myself in social activities, social entrepreneurship activities, and I've always had a deep passion for Jamaica and a fervent belief in the power and the prospects and the potential of Jamaica. And I gradually came to the frank realization that the opportunity for the greatest impact on the things I care most deeply about come through the political process. So it's been a very gradual process for me. I mean, having served in various capacities in the public sector and as an advisor and in government and so forth. And it has been a gradual transition, coming to the realization, that the things I care most about can be best achieved through the route that I have just taken.
Yeah, I think Jamaica is very fortunate, really, to have people like you who are willing to make that transition. But how do you see yourself tackling the political issues? In the private sector, you can execute a lot more easily, a lot more quickly. There are not many private institutions with over 100,000 employees and many, many different constituencies to address. How do you see yourself handling the politics of it?
Yeah, I mean, politics is politics. But politics consists of human beings. Politics exists everywhere you have institutions. Everywhere you have organizations, politics exists. And, corporate politics can be as fierce as any kind of politics.
Yeah.
be that as it may, is quite a different game, if you want to use that word, or field, politics as we know it here.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, what I see as the big difference between the politics of other organizations and the politics of this form of public service is the absence of protection from hierarchy. That's what the real distinction is. So the politics of university life, the politics of religious organizations, the politics of business organizations is very real, but it is circumscribed by hierarchy, and that hierarchy offers protection. There are certain things you don't say to the bishop. Right? There are certain things you cannot say to the CEO. There are certain things that you cannot say to the vice chancellor.
Yeah.
When it comes to politics, all those barriers are removed because you are equal to, in every sense of the word, to your constituent. And it's in the removal of those barriers that politics takes a different form, that everybody has the right to express themselves, which doesn't necessarily exist in other forms of organizations. Yeah. So having laid out for you what I see as the main distinction, the way in which I am approaching politics is to deal with people as human beings, to see them as I see myself, as people and persons with aspirations, with goals, inhibitions, fears, and hopes, and to engage people in a transparent and frank manner, bringing to the fore an analytical approach, explaining problems, explaining the positions that we're taking and the reason behind it, and be willing to listen. And I believe that is an approach that will bear fruit.
Yeah, well, we certainly hope so.
Yeah.
To get a little closer to the let's say the meat of the matter, again, economic growth, one of our great challenges for very many years. What do you see, or which countries do you think offer good examples of having successfully achieved high rates of economic growth over a sustained period of time? What's your favorite growth story?
I mean, there are many countries that have experienced sustained growth over a long period of time. You would have to, to choose the favorite from among the 100 can be a difficult thing. But let me just offer just a few examples. I mean, there's obviously the Singapore story that we know very well, but I won't dwell on that. You have stories closer to home, like what happened in Colombia after President Uribe came to power and, in a decisive way tackled the descent of citizen Colombia as a whole into sort of narco-trafficking, and the growth dividends that occurred between about 2002 and 2008. Colombia did have a lot of natural resources, but there was a significant dividend that came from the unprecedented crackdown in his country. Another example is the example of India. India would have engaged in serious structural reform in the beginning of the 1990s into the 2000s, reform that centered around deregulating of entities, allowing foreign investment to come in, liberalizing the economy, structural reforms on the monetary side, some amount of fiscal consolidation after their balance of payments crisis in 1991. And India, in the years that followed between about 1993 and 2003, had growth of about 5%. And then in the period between about 2004 and 2008 had growth of just under 9%. Wow. That was fueled by a lot of liquidity in the global system. They had some reversals in the financial crisis, but have begun to grow again at 7%. I like India as a story for a couple of reasons. One, they share with us English common law, English colonial heritage, some of the very same institutions that we have. They are a liberal democracy, unlike the other Asian stories.
Yeah.
where growth has come out of illiberal political policies, and they are large.
Huge.
So if they can do it at their scale, then why can't we?
Yeah.
So I think the India story, for those reasons, is one that we can learn a lot from. And again, a lot of their growth was fueled through the investment in human capital and in what that human capital produced. And like us as well, they have a large diaspora, very similar in many ways. Scale being the big difference, but that scale for me offers a lot of encouragement. Because if you can do it at the scale of 1.3 billion, then why can't you do it at the scale of 2.7 million?
Yeah. Yes, indeed. In fact, the combination of high rates of growth and high investment in human capital certainly seems to be one of the common stories behind many of the growth successes that we've seen. In terms of economic policies, what do you think were the sort of macroeconomic policies that they implemented that contributed to their high rates of growth?
Well, India,
in India or any of the other countries?
India would have they had a balance of payments crisis in 1991, very similar to what we have had many times in Jamaica, right? Where you just wake up one morning and you find out that you don't have enough reserves in the Bank of Jamaica to maintain external viability. And out of that crisis in 1991, they were forced to engage in radical reform of their economy. The kind of reform that we have been engaged in for some time. Deep sort of structural reform on the fiscal side to get a hold of the fiscal accounts to ensure that the fiscal path was credible. A lot of reforms around regulation, deep deregulation in terms of business processes, and deregulation in many sectors, the industrial sector, agrochemicals and agriculture, and so forth. They engaged in deep monetary reforms and opened up the country for investment, i.e. were able to make their laws and their systems compatible with the kinds of laws and systems that the big sort of global portfolio and foreign direct investors find attractive.
Yeah. Well, it sounds as if we've done some of those things, albeit serially.
Yes.
But hopefully this time around we can make them stick.
Yeah, I mean, they had the advantage of scale, and therefore the domestic market was extremely attractive to foreign investors.
Right.
And therefore they're able to attract a lot of foreign direct investment that was geared towards production for the domestic economy in a way that we haven't. Scale doesn't offer us the same opportunities, right? So to go to India and to become a bread manufacturer or a biscuit manufacturer would be a very attractive proposition for a multinational because of the size of the domestic economy. That advantage we don't necessarily have. So the story is not going to be completely analogous,
right,
but it offers a lot of hope for pursuing the kind of reforms that we're pursuing. Because when they were doing it in the early 1990s, no one could have predicted what happened after.
Right.
And my fervent belief as well is that in the same way no one could ever see that Jamaica could have overnight J-dollar interest rates of 2.5% and the 11-year GOJ bond that yields 5.4% in Jamaican dollars. No one ever saw it as possible. Similarly, no one today sees as possible the kind of growth rates that Jamaica will eventually experience if we are able to continue on the reform path.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure we're all hoping that you'll be proven absolutely right in that case. But you've spoken also about economic independence in some of your early speeches. And I've certainly, from what I've heard, that it is related to some of the issues you mentioned a while ago, that we're not strangers to crisis, and that has led us to be very dependent on the multilateral institutions. What could you tell us a little bit about that concept and why you think it's important, and how it might affect our prospects for growth?
Yeah, I think that the pursuit of economic independence is an imperative for Jamaica. Political independence refers to the freedom of a people to make their own political choices. Economic independence is an analogous concept that political independence does not necessarily guarantee. Right. Economic independence refers to the ability of a country and the disposition of a country to put itself on a path where it can be responsible for its own economic decisions without the aid and help of external parties. It is the opposite of dependence. The way I like to put it, Charles, in a way that everybody can understand, if you have a neighbor next door, and every day you go to the neighbor and you say, look, can I have some bread? Can you lend me some salt? Can I get a cup of sugar? Because I need to make some lemonade. That is dependence, right? Because you are depending on your neighbor for your basic needs. Interdependence is different. Interdependence relates to I offer you things economically, you offer me things economically. But dependence is an unhealthy reliance on external parties. And in a certain sense, we have become comfortable with dependence in a way that we don't necessarily always realize. Sometimes opinion pages, speak to that level of dependence that we have cultivated. We have to, as Jamaicans, construct and maintain our own institutions that can build consensus around a set of policies that we need to pursue as a country to deliver the improvement in standard of living that our citizens require, and that we have the own capacity as a people to monitor our economic progress through the democratic systems that we have in place, through the media, through other organizations, and to do the right things for the country for the right reasons, and not because some external party has advised us or tells us that that is the right thing to do. Oftentimes over the past several years, the policies that have been right for Jamaica in restoring our financial health have often been justified and blamed on the IMF or on an external party. That is a dependent mentality. We need to put our house in order because we want to ensure that our children have a better prospects than we have. And economic independence, speaks to, it is as much a practice and a discipline as it is a destination. Yeah. You have to have the mindset of economic independence to ultimately, and the discipline to ultimately emerge as an economically independent country.
Yeah, well, that's extremely important because the point you made about continuity, we have a very competitive political system, and the continued success will involve some amount of continuity from administration to administration. I mean, I think we've seen in the transition from the previous administration to this one that there has been continuity in policy. And I guess we're hoping that we will continue and make the transition towards growth. If we're going to have an extended period of success, it will be necessary for whichever administration might succeed yours to continue with those policies, to maintain that sense of responsibility, and, as you say, doing the right things for the right reasons.
Yeah, and let's be clear about what continuity means. Continuity means just continuation of a certain degree of fiscal sanity. Okay, so within the boundaries of what is fiscally sane, there's a room for lots of difference.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a room for lots of policy choice. Okay? So what we want to ensure remains continuous is the anchoring of Jamaica's fiscal trajectory on the medium-term objective of getting our debt down to 60% of GDP, thereby offering the prospect of larger fiscal space for us to be able to spend on priority areas and on areas that can actually accelerate economic growth.
Yeah.
And that is what needs to be continued.
Yeah, and essentially we're talking about living within our means and observing that in terms of government spending and revenue and so
yes,
on.
but it once we sort of internalize what independence really means, then it's something that we won't necessarily sort of need to talk about and refer to from time to time. It'll just be natural.
Yeah.
For all of the debate and the rancor in the United States, it's hardly likely that any political leader is going to pursue a path that is going to take the United States into dependent status. This is not going to happen, right? So, yet there's a ton of rancor and debate, right? So, it's something that we don't, we need to get to the point that we don't need to talk about. If you want to be independent, if you want to steer the ship of Jamaica in the wide open world and retain your